Okay, this is the next major chapter. The biggest band I really ever played with was called the Northwest Company. Started out of Maple Ridge, BC, which is Haney back in those days. Had members were Ray O'Toole, Gowan Jorgensen, Vidar Skoftaby, and Jerry Ringrose was the original drummer, and I replaced him. And they called me when I was through. They wrote me a letter in New Zealand. Gowan wrote me a letter, asked me to come back and play for the band because they were unhappy with Jerry Ringrose. They'd already had a record out called Hard to Cry and got to get away from it all. It actually ended up being one of the biggest records the Northwest Company ever had. I kind of liked Jerry's drumming. He was a thrasher on the drums, but anyway, that's another story. I came back and flew back, started to live at Rick's house, Rick McCarty's house out in Haney, which is Maple Ridge nowadays, and his parents were nice, I remember. I think I had my own bedroom there. And the Northwest Company, I started playing gigs with them right away. We didn't work jobs. We quit some of the guys had jobs. I didn't have a job at the time. And everybody ended up quitting their jobs to go full time. We made the big plunge. That was a big time in our life because Gowan used to sell shoes, and I forget where Ray worked, but we used to practice. Rick's parents ran a driving range, Pitt Meadows Golf driving range on Lougheed Highway, and we used to practice upstairs at the driving range, and I helped pay my board there by working at the driving range with Rick. We'd go out in the morning, and we had these plunker things that we'd go along, and we had a little cart. We'd plunk the balls and throw them in the cart. We had to wear hard hats and vests. People were actually shooting golf balls out there. Good Lord. And we'd collect all the balls and bring them in, and so that they could sell more balls for people. And we started, I'm going to do sort of three parts of this. This is the 5-piece band. So it's Rick, Gowan, Vidar, Ray O'Toole, and myself. Ray O'Toole was a great guitar player, still is. Anyway, some of the memorable people I met when I first came back were Vicky. She ended up marrying Rob Frith, who owns Neptune Records. She's still around. And Jean MacDonald, I fell in love with her. She was a real cutie. She's Scottish with red hair. And then Chris Blades, he was kind of he had a little house out in Maple Ridge, and he was smoking dope already and everything, and he had all these posters in his house and the incense burning, and he did a lot of the Northwest Company posters in later years. And then there was Pale Dale Clark. He sort of helped manage the early Northwest Company. He was a friend of, I don't know who he's a friend of. That's how we met Ron Graham. Ron Graham and Dale Hunt not Dale Hunt. Pale Dale were friends. Anyway, we started playing gigs. I remember playing one in North Vancouver, and I was kind of not that loud of a drummer, I guess, but Gowan wanted me to play real loud because they played loud, this band. So I ended up having to beat the heck out of my drums because we didn't mic drums back in those days. So I used the back end of my sticks. I ended up doing that, and I ended up having to wear gloves because my hands were getting so blistered. And we played, I remember playing a garage opening on Kingsway where they opened up a service station, and we played the Legion Hall in Maple Ridge. We used to go down to the music stores, me and Rick. We'd drive downtown, we went to New West in those days, to Tartini's. It later became Jesson's Music, E. Jesson, and Marie, and forget the guy's name. They worked there. they ran it. And I bought my Rogers drums when I came back from New Zealand. I'd sold my Ludwig drums, so I bought a brand new set of black Rogers drums from them. We used to stop on the way in, me and Rick, at the Wild Duck Inn in those days. It was a really neat pub on the road, and we'd stop there and have hot dogs and beer. Back in those days, we used to wear matching outfits. We had these houndstooth coats that we wore at our gigs, like Paul Revere and the Raiders, kind of an idea. Remember, Ray used to get on Rick's shoulders and play the guitar, and then we practiced at the driving range. But Rick and I ended up getting a little house down by a river. I remember Rick used to bring all kinds of girls over there. I can't remember me doing it much. We started listening to Jimi Hendrix and stuff like that. And then eventually, me and Rick lived at the driving range where we used to practice. I'll come back to that in a minute. I wrote my first song back then. I can't remember what it was. One of the very first ones I wrote was called "I'm Your Guy," and that's a long time ago. But the first one I wrote, I can't remember the name of it. We recorded a song called "Time for Everyone," which became a 45. We recorded that at Sycord Studios down on 4th Avenue with Robin Spurgeon, who recorded Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck and a lot of bands in Vancouver. It was called "Time for Everyone." And I wrote the slow part of that song. It was just a fast song, and I suggested putting this sort of psychedelic part in. I started to play guitar a lot and write songs. Because the Northwest Company did original music a lot. And I don't know, I still messed around the piano a little bit. I used to, when we'd go to a dance hall to play, if there was an old piano there, I'd play a little bit, and the guys all thought, "Oh, wow, listen to that, he plays the piano." But mostly they loved me as a drummer. And I remember we went up to play teen town dances in Kelowna. That's where I met Norma Gurley. She was from Rutland. That's the first girl I ever smoked pot with, or first person, period. And I remembered we went to, these are some of the things about Northwest Company. We went to Powell River once with Roy Hennessy and Darryl B. Darryl B. was a DJ at Seafun. So was Roy Hennessy, and Darryl used to manage the Northwest Company also. He got us, recording contracts at a lot of big concerts. We went to this Powell River gig with Roy Hennessy and Darryl once. The 101 Nights put it on, this motorcycle gang. And I remember they parked their bikes all around inside the hall, and it was a big bash. And then we went over to their clubhouse after and went downstairs. Downstairs they had a shooting range that you could, with a dirt wall, you could sit and shoot handguns at the wall and drink beer down there. And when everybody got so drunk, when we left, Gowan actually stole a case of beer out of their stash there. Boy, that was a dangerous thing to do. Another one I met was Heather Grant, who later worked for White Spot. She's still working for one of these big real estate companies or something. She was with Dance Party in Vancouver. Anyway, I'm going to start here. Let's see. We also, one of the big things, we had a falling out with Darryl Burlingham eventually in the 5-piece. He wanted us to go up Grouse Mountain to play some kind of a thing, and I forget why the guys didn't want to, but we never showed up, and he was up there promoting us. Well, that was a stupid thing we did. Then he got mad at us and wouldn't. He didn't work with us for quite a while after that. But he's the one that got us on all the early concerts. So we went on road trips. We went to. I don't know who lined it up. Probably Darryl, because he came from Winnipeg. He lined us up a road trip out to Winnipeg, and we went out there. And Don Hunter, that booked the Guess Who, he booked us out there. And we used to book through Bruce Allen, too, in Vancouver, and MCM and Associates, Craig McDowell's company. But we went out to Winnipeg, and we played some... Don Hunter sent us all these funny little places out of town. And I remember playing a concert out there with the Guess Who. And then we also went on the bus with Jumbo, their big bouncer roadie guy. We went on the Guess Who bus. They went out by car somehow. Went to a dance outside of Winnipeg somewhere. And it was full of people, and it was a rough dance too. Jumbo stood right in front of the stage and batted people around. They got too close to the band. Remember Burton Cummings? He's kind of he's kind of a conceited jerk, I thought. But anyway, while we were out there, we met the Garnett Gillis, who made Garnett amps. I still have the BTO. That was before Bachman Turner Overdrive, but I have the BTO amp still. The amp had the PA head for the band. But he sent us all, we went to his factory. The guests who were already using his Garnett amps. So when we got back to Vancouver, he sent us out, Gowan and Ray. This might have been later. This was after we were a three-piece, I think, though. I'm getting mixed up here. Anyway, we ended up with Garnett amps. We had a Garnett, this was in the three-piece of the Northwest Company. We had a Garnett PA system, which was two big speakers, two 15s in each speaker with a horn, and then the guitar amps had two 15s and a 100-watt head. The PA had a 100-watt head, but I'm thinking that was the Garnett trip was when we were trio. I should go over this with Gowan. Anyway, that's one of the trips. We used to practice at the driving range, of course, and the hippies were starting there around 4th Avenue. And we went, I remember going to the Easter Bee Inn. That you could hear the music floating through the air. And there was another time we went to a concert, one called Strawberry Mountain was a fair. I wrote a song called At the Fair, and that's one of the only songs I can't find. I remember going to another festival up where Westwood Racetrack is out in Coquitlam too, and I ended up buying a set of drums off the Orphans from Winnipeg. They were a band. I bought the set of 1964 Ludwig drums, which I incorporated into my act as a double bass drums. We also played Regina Days, of course, that garage opening on Kingsway. We played with concerts, though, in Vancouver. Darryl B. lined us up these concerts. I got separate chapters on these parts, but we played with The Who, the Beach Boys, and Paul Revere and the Raiders at the time. Big shows. Later on, we went on to play with Boz Scaggs. We played a lot of bands, different bands. The Byrds. I'll go into all the bands I played with. Chuck Berry. We did fronting concerts for bands like that. I have a list somewhere of all the bands. Anyway, Dawn Hunter from the Guess Who booked us out in Winnipeg. I met a girl out there. We used to call her Devil Woman. That was the first place I took LSD, was in Winnipeg. I remember going down to the Parliament buildings and wandering around, thinking how beautiful everything was. And she worked at a leather shop. She gave me a beautiful, it was actually pigskin leather coat, a gray coat, which I wore for years. And I remember staying in a hotel there once. We had 2 roadies with us, 7 guys in one room, and we took the mattresses off the beds so that we had 4 beds. So we split it all up, and I don't know, we just camped out in the one hotel room with one room. I remember Ray took some girl in the closet and was banging her in the closet. He was always a real devil, Ray O'Toole. And then we used to go to the Salisbury House out there. Also, there was a lot of really great delis in Winnipeg at the time. Salisbury House was like a late-night joint. You could get chili and hamburger and stuff. And we also went to Thunder Bay on that trip, that road trip. We had Kenny McCall was one of our roadies, and Jim Pentland we called Pitman, and they were a lot of fun. They stayed with us until we moved till we became a 4-piece. We did the, let's see, I think, yeah, I went into details about the concerts with the Who and the Beach Boys and stuff like that. I actually haven't written one about the Beach Boys, except I remember Glenn Campbell filled in for Brian Wilson because he didn't want to tour anymore. But they sounded great, and I remember their drummer, Dennis Wilson, he had a funny way of drumming. He sort of drummed left-handed he'd use his left hand on the hi-hat, and he used a lot of toms when he played the tom-tom parts of the drums. He didn't play cross-handed like most drummers. And so most drummers sit and play the snare with one hand and cross over to play the hi-hat, but he played it the other way. And so I kind of noticed his style was a big part of the Beach Boys, and their harmonies were great. Glenn Campbell was filling in for Brian Wilson, and he was a fantastic guitarist, of course, and a great singer. So anyway, that was the 5-piece, and I can't remember if we played any more. I just think we only recorded at Sycord Studios on 4th Avenue with Robin Spurgeon. We did that Time for Everyone there. And the flip side was a Beatles song that we did, sort of a psychedelic version. I'll remember it in a minute what it is. Anyway, that's enough for that part. Northwest Company 2, 5-piece. The other flip side of Time for Everyone was She's a Woman. My love don't give you presents. Oh, the woman I do. That's an old Beatles song, but we did it sort of a psychedelic version. But before I joined the Northwest Company, they had out Hard to Cry, and 8 Hour Day was a great song they had. And the other song from Hard to Cry was, just a minute. The Northwest Company, the songs that they did were Get Away From It All, Hard to Cry, 8 Hour Day, End is Autumn, before I joined them, and Ballad of the Tragic Fat Man. But She's a Woman was the flip side of the other song, Time for Everyone. So that's that part. This is part D, I guess, of the 5-piece of the Northwest Company. I talked to Gowan. When we used to practice at the driving range, there was an old man that lived down the street called Jack that we used to go over and get drunk with him. He always kept saying, 76, I'm 76, I'm 76. Gowan reminded me of that. And on our first road trip, that one I was talking about, when we went out to Winnipeg and booked through Don Hunter, the Guess Who, and where we met the Guess Who, and I think later on we didn't exchange houses with them, but anyway, that's where I bought my first set of drums from a guy named Mark, and he was in the band called the Orphans, and they had a house called the Dog House they lived in. Anyway, I bought my set of drums off there, and so we made it as far as Fort William at Thunder Bay, and we played at a place called the Flamingo Club. That's the place the guy said somebody wanted us to play Hush songs. Gowan said we can't. They were a rough audience. We can't because we got no organ. And somebody wanted us to play an Elvis song, said they'd break my drums if we didn't. It was called the Flamingo Club, and they had a sign out, the Rootin' Tootin' Music and Song, the Northwest Company. We had 2 roadies back then. I mentioned Jim Pentland, and we called Ken McCall Teddy, and Pitman we called Pentland. But we had another guy first called Nels Hansen. He was actually a guitar player, pretty good too, and he ended up killing himself on heroin later on in life. That's what I heard. So that's the place that we stayed downtown, and and had the roadies and everything. Where I met Devil Woman, and we did took the acid of the Parliament buildings. We were a trio then. That's the time we went out with Ron Graham, so I'll get into that at the trio. But the 5-piece was the only road trip that we did was out there. Was probably Darryl B. lined us up with Don Hunter from the Guess Who, and that's when we played out there. So, and then I'm going to go, the next little chapter I'll go into will be the 4-piece. Okay, thank you. Okay, this is my story about playing a gig with The Who, the band from England, my generation. Anyway, I was in the Northwest Company. I was the drummer in a West Coast band from Vancouver called the Northwest Company, a 6-member recording group who wrote original songs and performed songs also by other music artists. We were sort of like Paul Revere and the Raiders, who we also played concerts with them. Played 2 or 3 times with Paul Revere and the Raiders. The Who performed in Vancouver sometime around 1968. Darrell Burlingham, who was called Darryl B., was a disc jockey for the radio station CKLG or CFUN at the time. He got us a spot on the show as an opening act. I just returned from living in New Zealand for a year, and the Northwest Company had called me and sent me a letter, actually, and asked me to come back and be their drummer. And they were actually, I'd been in the Questions before I'd went to New Zealand, and the Northwest Company was recording. They'd had records out already, and they were doing TV shows, and I thought, oh boy, this is my chance. So it was my first taste of the big time, and the biggest, most prestigious gig I'd ever played on. The Who were huge at the time with their hit song, My Generation. I remember our band standing around the dressing room with Darryl B. and The Who, the band, the members from The Who, were all drinking Scotch or Canadian rye whiskey, probably whiskey. They loved the Canadian whiskey. It was popular around the world. The Who was dressed up in their outfits they wore back in the 60s. And our bands wore outfits also. We used to wear matching outfits. I can't remember if we did at that show. As the psychedelic age came on, we all dressed differently. Anyway, it was very exciting to be close to the famous band. The 2 people from The Who that really stuck with me was Pete Townsend and Keith Moon. Pete was wearing a frilly shirt like he did in those days, and I was talking to Keith. He was great at joking, and we were all drinking a lot. We talked about music, all kinds of things. Roger Daltrey was also fun, and John Entwistle was a little quieter. My band, the Northwest Company, we went on stage to perform first. Behind the stage, I remember seeing The Who's equipment and seeing how beat up Keith Moon's drums were from beating on them at the shows. He also had a big box of extra cymbals, thinned ones called crash cymbals. He used to hit them so hard they would crack and break. The concert was at the Agrodome in Vancouver, which was the biggest venue at the time for large events. It was designed as a place for a circus and had another building with a tunnel attached for the animals. It was also good for concerts. That's where the place I met the Rolling Stones on the other story. Keith Moon was quite the guy. He was kind of like a wild guy. He was drinking heavier than the other guys too. And he was a crazy guy, but fun. The Agrodome, the biggest drawback about the Agrodome was the sound was horrible. The echo was so bad, the sound get lost in that place. My drums were on a high platform set up behind the rest of the band members. And when we started to play music, the slapback from the drums and the other instruments was so confusing and terrible, I had a super hard time being able to play, let alone I was nervous. And with a hugely important event like that, you'd hit the drum and you'd hear the slapback of that noise coming back split second later. So you really, really had to concentrate to try to, the amps were all ahead of me, so I couldn't hear worth a darn. Nowadays they wear earphones and everything. So one thing embarrassingly funny happened when we were performing. I dropped or broke a drumstick and it fell to the stage in the front. And Ray O'Toole, our guitar player, picked it up and threw it into the audience as a souvenir, someone picked it up and threw it back. Whew. How embarrassed. They wanted the Who, not us. In those times, I used to wear black leather gloves because we played so loud and so hard. They looked kind of cool, and they didn't mic the drums back then. So I used to get big blisters on my hands because my hands would sweat and I couldn't hang onto the drumsticks. Because the Northwest Company, we played very loud. I used the back end of my drumsticks in those days to try to keep up to the amps because there was no mics, you know. I also remember how Keith Moon would bounce. He would bounce his drumsticks off the floor tom. He'd throw the drumstick on the floor tom and it would flip around, go way up high in the air, and he would catch them and keep on playing. And he did some fancy stick twirling too, which really impressed me. I did stick twirls too, but this bouncing it off the drum was very good. He didn't catch every one though, but it was a good trick I'd never seen before. Roger Daltrey put on quite a show. I can't remember how he was dressed. I know years later he wore a coat with long fringes hanging from the back. It was buckskin. I can't remember if he wore that there. I think he did, but I'm not sure. But he was raising his arms and moving around. He was a really good showman, master showman. He'd pick up the microphone stand and do all kinds of tricks by lifting up above his head, twirling it around. He could also push the top of the stand when it was sitting upright. He'd push it and it would flop over away from him, but just enough so it wouldn't fall right over, and it would tilt back and right back at him, which was a really neat trick. He had the balance part down just so it would go down far enough to come back to him, and that would spring back, you know. And then he would also he'd also mastered another trick he'd mastered with the microphone. He had a really long cord, and he'd twirl this microphone around his head like a lasso thing, and he'd throw it out in the audience above their heads, and it would go flying way out there, and then he'd yank it back and catch it, which was a really great trick. So it would it was like the lasso would get it momentum. He'd go fly over the audience heads, pull back the cord, and he would catch it every time. It was really impressive. The crowd loved it. At the end of the Who's performance, they all smashed and wrecked their equipment. I remember Pete Townsend smashing his guitar into the amp a bunch of times and hitting it on the stage and smash it into bits. Keith Moon kicked over his drums and banged on him, and he beat the heck out of him. Kicked. That's why they were so beat up. And he pushed his drums over off the platform onto the lower stage and trashed them. That's why they were all trashed, those drums. The crowd went wild, and it was a part of their act. I think there was a bit of a riot after, but what fun we had. It was great. Okay, this is the next section, a little bit left over from the 5-piece Northwest Company, is that we did about, 4 or 5 or 6 shows on Let's Go, which was a cross-Canada TV show. It came from a different city every night of the week. 5 nights a week. There was Vancouver, Winnipeg, Montreal, Toronto, and Halifax. I think that was and each week had a different band, and so we were actually featured on one with Jimi Hendrix. He wasn't at the studio, but I remember Jerry Lee came to the studio. We didn't meet him either, but not at the time. But we did play with famous bands. I did meet the Rolling Stones 3 times in one night when me and Frank snuck into their concert in about 65, Frank Babakayev, at the Agrodome. So, and the Northwest Company, we did play with, all together, throughout the years we played with The Who, the Beach Boys, 10 Years After, Boz Scaggs, the Byrds, Bachman Turner Overdrive, Mash McCann, Chuck Berry, just to name a few. I'm going to go through famous people in another section, but now this section here is basically about the 4-piece band. Gowan doesn't remember too much about it because it was kind of we decided Rick McCarty was. Gowan did a lot of the deciding in the band, but we kicked Rick McCarty out of the band. I was actually pretty involved in that family because the McCartys had put me up for nearly free to live at the house when I came back from New Zealand. So it was a real awkward moment for me. I can't remember if Rick and I were living at that little house that we had down by the river. We had a little house down by the river there at one time. And either there at the driving range, and we booted Rick out, and we decided we all had quit our jobs, so we decided we were going to move into the city, into town. And Rick was he was a good front man, we decided years later. But he was kind of a haywire guy. He used to get drunk and do all kinds of stupid things. I can't think of all the things he did. I heard him running down the golf course with no clothes on, but I kind of did a lot of stupid things too. But he would get kind of gross at parties. So anyway, yeah, he was quite the guy. When he got drinking, he was pretty haywire. So anyway, we did kick him out, and then Daryl B., our manager and the disc jockey from Seafun, was totally pissed off at us for kicking Rick out. And then we never showed up at the Grouse Mountain gig that he had lined up there for us, and we were supposed to go up there and play at a big party, at a ski party, and we shouldn't have done that, that's for sure. Anyway, he dumped us after that, and so we thought, heck with it. We were experimenting in LSD and everything at the time, so we actually moved into town from Maple Ridge, the four-piece, Ray O'Toole, Gowan, myself, and Vidar Skoftaby. And we moved into a house in Burnaby, North Burnaby, it was down Texaco Drive, which is on the Barnett Highway. There used to be a Shell refinery near there. And we moved down there, and it was out of Burnaby. That's back when McDonald's had burgers for 19 cents. But we moved down there, and it was like heaven down there. We had this house. It was 2 stories, and the roadies moved upstairs. I had a bedroom downstairs, and then there was the other couple of bedrooms. Marilyn and Vidar had a bedroom, and Gowan and Ray had a bedroom somewhere. And we used to practice in the living room. And we played so loud that when the train went by, we couldn't even hear the train. And the train track was right outside our door. And we were actually right by the train crossing. And we wrote a song called The Train, which is featured on one of the live albums. It's called the African Jam, but it started as the Train Jam, I think. And my bedroom was really neat. I had drawings all over my walls. We'd smoke dope, and then I'd give pens to people, and we'd draw all these like cartoons and all kinds of neat. A lot of them are really great. I wish I had pictures of them. And that's the time. Down at Texaco Drive was like it was like living in a park. There was no houses near us, only one house way up the road. And there was an old fisherman that used to have a boat down there he worked on every day, and he drank all the time. He was always sipping off a Mickey, and him and me he was kind of like Ernest Hemingway. We used to, trade stories. I even caught a few flounders down in there, in the inlet down there. And I used to walk down the inlet, take LSD sometimes, or walk down the inlet. There was an old, it must have been some kind of an old, it was like cement with bricks and everything. It was some kind of an old foundry or something down there. It was sort of magical down there. And I used to wander around down the beach there, and it was a lot of fun. And that's when I met my best friend, West. His name was David Alexander Brown. He wrote a lot of really neat songs. He wrote California Drag Strippin' Baby, The Waves, which I recorded. And he became a lifelong friend of mine. And he was also good at art. But he got me into health foods because he was eating brown rice. He lived up the street in a little place where a cement factory had a house by it. And him and this guy named Peter Pan lived up there, and they used to take acid all the time, LSD. And So anyway, I started doing LSD with West and everything, and he was such a neat guy 'cause he played auto harp, and he knew Joni Mitchell, he knew Steve Stills, he knew Neil Young. He used to be a folk singer back in Toronto, and he was very smart and had a lot of insight about everything. I'll probably do a whole chapter on him, but he influenced me a lot in my songwriting and everything. He was a little bit younger than me, not much though, but he died a few years ago. He ended up driving cab all his life, but I don't know whatever happened to Peter Pan. And we used to practice in the room there, and we actually recorded a single down there with Vidar singing "Can You Remember," and we recorded that at Sycord again. But Marilyn, Vidar's girlfriend, moved in Marilyn into the house, and then it became, I don't know, it just changed everything. It wasn't, the band lost all its punch, you know. It kind of was bad. I remember meeting a guy named Dale Wicks, who became a friend of mine. He sold me an old clunker of a car, a Renault, like a little crappy car. I found out it had a cracked block later on, so that was a waste of money. I did meet some kind of a sleazy girl there. I think I brought her home from a gig or something. She hung around for a week or so till we finally got rid of her. She wanted to move in. You know, everybody wanted to live at our house. I remember messing around with her up in the bush. Gowan doesn't remember her, but... And then we met Brian Slobodian and Gary Aitkins. They were sort of pot dealers out of North Burnaby. Gary Aitkins was a crazy bugger. We used to go down to... remember being down at the Gastown Inn years... I don't know if it was around that time or... The Gastown Inn was like a big drinking place down in Gastown, and there was the Anchor, too. All the hippies used to go down there, and the travelers, and drink and do drugs. And he had a gas mask with a pipe on the end. And I remember it was really illegal back then, but everybody did it anyway. We were smoking from this gas mask. You put it on your face and inhale when they lit the pipe. That was down around then. It was kind of like Malcolm Lowry also lived down in that area at one time, the guy that wrote Under the Volcano. Pulitzer Prize-winning book. That's a great movie if you ever see it, with Albert Finney. And then I remember going with West out to Ioko lots of times. There was, who was it? A couple of people lived out there. Claude and somebody else. Claude and Darka was a girl, but she lived up in they moved to Naramata later on. But there was also another real skinny, unhealthy girl. I can't remember her name. I'll think of it later. We used to go out there and he'd score a joint and then we'd bring it back and smoke it up. And but that's when we were recording. We recorded only the one single as a 4-piece. And then we ended up, Vidar decided that he wanted to quit the band and become a mechanic or an accountant. And so we were doing a lot of acoustic kind of music and kind of slow. He wrote these slow songs, and they just didn't go over very good at the gigs for the Northwest Company. So when he left, we were actually glad. He moved up to Tappan, and he died a few years ago. He became an accountant or something out there. Him and Marilyn had kids, and it just didn't work very good having a girl living in that house. The two guys, the roadies, lived upstairs, and we had a skunk coming in that house. It was living in the walls. You could hear it crawling around in there. And I remember it came out of the wall one night, and it used to come out in the middle of the night from behind the stove somehow. And it came out, and I was laying in bed sleeping, and I heard this noise. I woke up, and there's a skunk right beside my bed walking around. And so I just thought, oh, no. So I laid still, and I heard it walk out of my room, and it went through the kitchen and went up the stairs into the bedroom up there, and where the two roadies were sleeping, Pitman and Kenny, and we called him Teddy, but anyway, he was like a teddy bear. He became a famous singer after years later. I didn't even know he could sing. Should have got him in a band. But he Ken McCall, yeah, he worked with Night Train Review and I think Zingo and a whole bunch of bands around town. He's quite a really neat guy. He used to jump up and pouch on Gowan's arm or something like a kid, like a little bird or something. But anyway, the skunk went up and I heard it go up the stairs, and all of a sudden I heard, "Hey, what's that? Oh, what's that?" And then they started yelling, and a skunk blew off upstairs and stunk our whole house up. Oh my God, for days. And I ended up, I had my dad's 22. I ended up shooting the damn thing behind the stove. I don't like to kill things, but anyway, it's either the skunk or us. So anyway, that's then Vidar left the band anyway, and I can't really remember much about what gigs we played. And can you remember that song? I'll have to look up and see what the flip side of it was. So thank you. I'm going to be doing a thing called Bits and Pieces later on of stuff I forgot and can't remember, but I forgot to mention when we were a 5-piece doing all those Let's Go shows, we used to go into the CBC studios, into the wardrobe part, and try on all these neat outfits that some of the shows we wore kind of outfit. I sort of wore a pirate's outfit once, and also at one time the Northwest Company, I think we were a trio then, but we used to rehearse at a place called Watts clothing rental store down on 7th Avenue or 4th Avenue, and I think it was 7th Avenue. And we rehearsed upstairs. On one side of the top floor was the rehearsal spot, and the other side was just full of all these costumes. And we would go in there and try all these different outfits. They had it all for movies. It was really neat. Anyway, this is probably the best time of my life, pretty near, was the 3-piece of the Northwest Company when we finally, Vidar left the band, and him and Marilyn got married and went up to, they might have got married when they were still in the band, I don't know, but they took off up to Salmon Arm to live, and it was a relief because they were sort of dragging our band down, and when we became a trio, we got a whole new life to us, and we went up to, our first gig was up in the Bowler Room up at Squamish. The first gig as a trio, I think it was called the Bowler Room. And I forgot to mention our tours that we went out. The first tour as a 5-piece was 1968. And the second tour we went out as a 3-piece was with Ron Graham as our manager, Ronnie Tomato, who I wrote the Ode to the Great Tomato for. I'll have to put that in a chapter. Anyway, that was 1970 when we went out in that time, and we used a tent to stay in, but I'll get into that later. So our first gig was in Squamish as a trio, and then we started rocking real good. I had double bass drums, and I also was learning at the same time. We moved from Texaco Drive, and we got this house in Burnaby on Patterson Avenue. It was, I think we had a house right before that in Burnaby. I think it was on Imperial or Rumble or one of those streets. And it was a kind of a crappy house, but we moved in there. Vidar, I think, was still with the band when we moved in there from Texaco Drive. And we built a practice room downstairs and used old carpets and carpeted the whole room in to keep the noise down. And we used to go down there. It was so dusty in there. No light or nothing. But we used to go down there, and that was kind of a horrible house. And then we found this house. Ronnie Graham was managing us, I guess, at the time. He started managing us. And then we found a house called the Patterson House on Patterson Avenue, right across from Central Park in Burnaby. And those were my days. Boy, what a great time. I was like 23, in perfect shape. I was drumming all the time and eating health food, so I was nice and thin. And we were right across from the little par 3 Central Park, and there was a lake in there and everything. I remember taking LSD once and going into the park we used to go in and walk through. It was so nice to have that big park there. And then I remember looking at the lake and actually looked like I could actually see the atoms in the lake, like on LSD is an unbelievable drug. I could see the sort of like, I guess, the molecules in the lake. It looked really neat anyway. So we used to go in there and hang out. It was really beautiful there. And I learned how to play the tabla and bayan, which were East Indian drums. There used to be a place called down on 4th Avenue in Burrard that was a health food store. I was really into health foods by then, from West, eating brown rice every day. I lived on brown rice. And I bought a set of these East Indian drums, and so I found out the guy from the Poppy Family, which was a famous band in town, Terry Jacks, who later had the hit Seasons in the Sun. There are the Seasons in the Sun, a million seller anyway. But before that, they were in the Poppy Family, him and Susan Jacks, and this Craig McCaw from the old Shadracks in Kelowna or Penticton, and Satwat Singh was their drummer. He was an East Indian guy. He used to play tabla and bayan on stage. So I met him somehow, and I taught him how to play Western drums so he could play with the Poppy Family on Western drums sometimes, and he taught me how to play tabla and bayan, and I used to sit down in our basement, Patterson Avenue, and practice on these things. But I went to his house a couple of times. He used to practice like 8 hours a day, that guy. He was so good on them, and he took lessons from Ravi Shankar's drummer over in India. He used to go back to India, and he had really super long hair, but he always had it in a turban, you know. I seen it down one time. I was so surprised. And the old Northwest Company house, we had a big, huge coal furnace down in the basement. We never lit it unless it got really cold out. We had a fireplace in the living room. We used to use it, but the coal furnace that house was always cold, but when we lit that furnace up, it had vents that went all through the house. It was just beautiful, nice. Its coal heat is so nice. But the coal, the next day you had to go down there and empty that coal furnace out. We used to have to take turns because that coal dust, God, it would get in your hair, all over your clothes. I think we used to put a scarf around our face or something. What a horrible job that was. But when it was going, it was fantastic. And we all had bedrooms in that house. I had my bedroom. I think I had really thick curtains. I had a purple bedspread. I had it all fixed up in there so good. And I would burn incense in there. And Ray had a room down the hall. And Gowan lived upstairs, and Ron lived upstairs. And we had this girl named Terry. I met her somewhere, maybe at Wreck Beach. She was like a super hippie. And she sort of moved up into the closet upstairs for a while. She used to walk around with no top on all the time in the house with her tits hanging out. I have a picture of her out in the front porch. But we used to go to Wreck Beach in those days, and I used to go there all the time. I went with 5 girls once, romping around, throwing the ball naked as, you know. It was Marshmallow, I think Lisa, maybe Jeannie, I can't remember, Janice. There was 5 girls, all I remember. I thought, it'll never get any better than this. And there used to be a place down in Kitsilano, I think it was on 4th Avenue, where Terry took me, called the Free Store, where they actually were drug dealers. They used to give me bags of, when they cut up bricks of hash, there would be all this powder left over, and they liked our band, so they'd give me a bag of powder to bring back to the band or some joints. And Terry lived there for when I first met her, and she was like super hippie. She's probably screwing all the guys there, who knows. I remember, anyway, they used to take a lot of LSD in that place. You know, one guy, he wrote all this stuff, all over the walls in the bathroom. He would go in there, on a trip for hours or something. And I remember having sex with Terry upstairs in her bed. She was like a little kitten. she'd sort of purr, and she always acted like she liked it so much. In fact, there was a little kid that used to hang around there that came in and actually watched us one day, but we had a cover over us, but he was sitting in the corner while we were going at it. Anyway, and they called themselves the Free Store, but it was they had clothes and stuff there they gave away to people. It was kind of a funny place. Anyway, I can't remember what that kid's name was, but I didn't care at the time. We were so used to being naked and everything, it didn't matter. And I remember down the road from Patterson Avenue, we used to practice in the basement, the three of us. I'd go down there and beat the drums like crazy. And we used to practice down there. There was a Captain George's down the corner, further down, that served hamburgers just like White Spot, because Nat Bailey had sold White Spot and he started Captain George's for a while. So I think we used to go there. I didn't eat much meat, though, in those days. I quit eating meat for a couple of years. And I used to make these big pots of beans and stuff. I tried to make corn chowder once with this real hard dried corn. I cooked it for days. Never got cooked down. Everybody used to eat it, beans and rice, because it was easy. But you couldn't leave anything in the fridge in that place, because people would, if you had something nice like a cake and put it in the fridge, there were so many people coming over to our house all the time hanging around, it would disappear quick. But the Patterson Avenue property we had 2 lots there, and an old couple had lived there. It was a huge house with a big foundation, made of rocks, and a 2-story house. It had a shed in the back that used to keep garden stuff, but they had raspberries, cherry trees, apple trees, pear trees, plum trees, everything there, and it was double lots. So I remember laying out in the backyard with Lisa, my first wife, before she was my wife. She was only quite young then, 15, and we were laid out there naked. Ray O'Toole was the first one to get in her pants, though. Anyway, he was a real devil, that guy. He was our guitar player. I'll probably get in trouble for saying all this, and then down the street, Ronnie Graham was our manager. They used to get up and play darts every morning, and I remember Ronnie used to get up first, you see, and he'd make the coffee, and you could hear this. He'd always stick his spoon in the coffee, and ding, 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 ding. They're like a damn alarm clock. But it was a lot of fun there, and people would hang around that house a lot. It was like a family, And down the road, there was a couple of guys living down there, Jim Tomlinson and Herb Riddell. They lived down this road. And then this other guy moved in down the road, too, Scotty Bergstrom, who owned a company that promoted bands. And he booked us on a whole bunch of concerts, because he used to be a concert promoter. And then there was a band way down Patterson on the other side called Motherhood. They were, seems to me I already told all these stories, but they were a kind of a hippie band too. But they got killed coming back on the freeway. There was actually a train crossing at Chilliwack on the freeway, and they were coming back late at night, and a train slammed into and killed a bunch of the members, the Sky family. They were called Motherhood. And but anyway, Scotty Bergstrom had Moose Valley Farms. It was he booked us with. He used to book Rita Coolidge and I forget, a bunch of different bands. He booked us on the concerts with 10 Years After that we played in the Northwest Company. We played with 10 Years After. A bunch of different bands. Boz Scaggs. The Byrds, we played with them out in Calgary with Seeds of Time and Fireweed were out there playing on the same show. We went on, Fireweed went on, that had Danny Tripper in it and Danny McGuinness. And then the Northwest Company went on, and Ray played this fiddle song he used to play. We used to play a kind of a hoedown fiddle song in one of the songs, and do the Dirty Boogie. We used to do the Dirty Boogie. That was one of our big songs. And then we went over so good, we got a big encore. Gowan told me that Rocket Norton from the Seeds of Time got all pissed off because they would cut into their time Gowan said, well, you get an encore then. And Gowan was good that way. And then we were a trio. We went out to on a road trip to Winnipeg once as the trio. And that's a whole story in itself out there, because that's where I guess that's when we got our Garnet equipment. When we came back, we went to meet Garnet, and we had, that was 1970, went on that road trip. Ron Graham went with us, and we stayed in tents. And we had, I don't think we had roadies at that time, I can't remember. But we were a real hot trio, and I remember we camping out. I remember we smoked a bunch of pot one day, and there was a fence, and we could see the Mounties doing the Mountie ride. All we could see is their heads bobbing up and down around. But we would go way out when we were on a Winnipeg tour. We played Buffalo Days in Regina, too, and then we played a gig with the Guess Who at a concert. That's separate from the other time we went with the Guess Who out to a show they did, but we played a big festival out at some gravel pit out of Winnipeg. Guess Who were playing? But we played at the Buffalo Days in Regina. And we played a lot of big concerts with the Byrds, that one with the Byrds. But there was only Roger McGuinn from the Byrds left by that time, apparently. And then we went to, we played with Mash McCann. We played with Bachman Turner Overdrive up in Grand Prairie. It seems to me I told some of these stories, but anyway, I'm keeping going. So anyway, the Central Park thing, I always remember is West coming over and bringing his auto harp and putting it on the table and singing one of his songs like Waves, and the waves roll in. Man, it just floored me how good that song was. I ended up making a recording of it myself, but he was like a magic kind of a guy. And he would come to our house, and he'd stay at our house for a while until Ron got mad at him, the manager. Tomato would get mad and kick him out. I always was the one that fought for him to stay there because he was a good influence, and we had a lot of fun. And then he would go stay with Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck Band for a while, and then he would go down to L.A. sometimes, and he'd go to San Francisco. He knew a lot of stuff about the States because he'd stay with Joni Mitchell, and he knew Steve Stills and from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. He knew a lot of people anyway. So, and then we had a cat named Meteor, and she had kittens, and all of a sudden we had Meteor, Frankie, Wendell, I can't remember, and maybe one other one. It got deluged with cats anyway, too many damn cats. Go near the fridge, you got all these damn cats, and that Frankie used to go and pee on my damn curtains. I think I already told you about Marshmallow. We went hiking once at Lynn Valley, up the mountain there, and she was up ahead of me. She used to be so beautiful before I was going out with Lisa. And we called her Marshmallow because she looked so good. She had pretty nice tits and pretty shapely. She was hiking up me, and I could see her panties up. She had this little blue skirt on, her little dress. You know, I could see her panties. We went back to the house. We took acid, too. And then we went in my bedroom and started making love on acid, and it was such an experience. God, I could think of all these things about humans and sex and the smell of it, and I don't know, everything about it. It was unbelievable, and sure stuck in my mind. Anyway, there used to be a girl that hung around our house that wore earphones all the time, and she'd be singing in the living room. Like she couldn't sing with her damn. And we used to go down to Gastown. I already said that in the other part, but to the Anchor and the Gastown Inn. We'd go down with Ron in the van, and you had to go down the Anchor real early in Gastown because it was all lined up. It was full of people drinking like hippies and smoking dope and everything. So, and then we'd get all tanked up. I was drinking. I didn't drink much in those days. I was on health foods, but when I did drink, I was trying to drink stout or something. I remember it would get so, And we used to drive back, and there used to be a pizza place. Ronnie used to sing, Verona pizza, have a pizza, Verona. We'd stop and get pizza. But the old Anchor, that was quite the joint. There was a lot going on in that place. I already told you about the gas mask at the Gastown Inn going around with the pot in it. One time we went on a tour up somewhere to Prince George or somewhere up there in our van with Ronnie Graham driving it, probably all drinking and smoking. We used to put our big Garnet speaker cabinets on the back of the floor of the van and then make it into like a bench seat back there and have, a bunch of quilts and everything on it and the amp heads and everything piled back there and drums and all this stuff. And we were going along. Ron was driving too fast and we went off the road into the damn ditch in Alice Pass. There's a picture of the green van sitting in there somewhere. That's when I met, I used to go out with Terry that used to stay at the house. And that's one time at the house, we all got scabies. I don't know where they came from. They're horrible little things. You can't see them. You itch. And everybody got them. They spread all over the house, and then we would have to have a bath, and you put this stuff, Quilata or something, all over you. It would burn your balls and everything, and leave it on for 24 hours. You could smell it. You have to wash all your clothes and everything, and then wait for a couple of days. Then if you started itching again, you had to do it again. And so everybody having them in the house and taking turns, we finally got rid of them, but gee. But that's when and there was a little house down at the corner. Used to be a flower shop. Lee Evans worked there, or she lived there. And a couple other girls lived there. There was it was the whole Patterson Avenue was like a bunch of little hippie houses. It was really neat, and we all used to visit. And girls would make baked bread and bring it to the Northwest Company, and that's when I met my first wife, Lisa. I'd been going out with Terry for a while, but I don't know, I started catching too many diseases. That free love in those days, every time it seemed like we went to the clinic, we got gonorrhea once, something else, mono went around, and, I don't know, there was always something. So finally, anyway, Lisa was really nice, and she was clean, come from a good family, and she was Gowan's cousin, so that's how we started going out. Anyway, I'm going to go back, leave this for now, and come back to it. Well, good morning again. A little bit hoarse today from singing all those cowboy songs. Anyway, I forgot to mention, I don't think I did in the Northwest Company, and I don't feel like listening to the whole thing again. But Ron Graham, who was Ronnie Tomato, we stayed with him until the end. He'd had a stroke in his later years, and we visited him a lot. I made him a lot of salmon loaves, and we used to meet him. He had a scooter. He used to still go around, smoke joints. He finally quit drinking, but he drank at the Windsor for years. I used to go down there, sitting. I ran into him years after the Northwest Company had broken up, and I'd been away touring and stuff. I ran into him. He was drinking at the Windsor. He'd worked for Kelly Douglas, the food distributors. Anyway, Ronnie was a great guy. The Northwest Company was actually the most fun when we were the trio living at Patterson Avenue, and Ronnie was our manager, and he was such a party guy. We'd go down to the Anchor hotel and all these Gastown Inn and drink and come home, get Verona pizza, all that stuff I told. And he was like a fatherly figure for the band, and I always remember he'd get up in the morning and stir his coffee with that damn spoon, ding, 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 right near our bedrooms. And they'd play darts every morning and, throw darts at the dartboard. And it was like a hang-around house, and people would bring joints over and get stoned in the morning, and Ron was a great guy. He was a lot of fun to be around, and he was like he could always get things done, he was like a go-getter, and kind of a big guy. We call him Big Ron, you know, Ronnie Tomato. We'd actually had parts in a, I probably told this story, but we had parts in some play one time where everybody took a different part, and he was a tomato, and it sort of stuck with him. Later on, he became the captain of the Patterson Avenue Perverts, which was a baseball team in the Cosmic League, and there was a bunch of hippies and all these different. They'd go out and drink and party and play baseball, softball. He was the pitcher, and he'd shoot this ball, it's called, where he'd wind up and he'd look like he's really going to pitch it, and he'd pitch this slow ball that went way up and down. The hitters always think they could hit it, you know, and they would swing at this thing and miss the damn drop ball. And he'd go, yeah, when he threw it, like, here's the ball you want, you know. Anyway, he was a funny guy, Ronnie. I loved the guy. And when we went out one time to play at a party at a Matsqui prison or Fraser prison or some prison. Gowan knows the name of it. I can't remember. I should have asked him. But it was out in the valley somewhere. And it was for pretty, I don't know, fairly hardened criminals, I guess. But we were all, you know, I had my big fur coat and long hair, and everybody would, and Ronnie, of course, you know, he probably drinking a beer on the way out there, and we had a hash pipe, and we used to get high before our gigs, and we smoked up all this hash on the way, and then we drive right up to the gates. Ron sticks the hash pipe under the front seat. I mean, it was real illegal back then. I got busted in Calgary and ended up spending 2 days in jail out there and got fined $300 and got a record for it. I had to get a pardon in the later years. And now I still have trouble getting in the States again because I tried to get Nexus and admit I'd been arrested. Anyway, Ronnie sticks the hash pipe under the front seat of the van, and we drive into the thing, and we're going to do a concert in this prison. And so the guards come out and go, hey, can we give you a hand, guys? Here, let us give you a hand. All this equipment. We must have reeked of hash. And because you're a rock and roll band, you can get away with a lot of things. So we went in there and we set up, and all these prisoners came in their garb and sat in this big gym. And then we got up there and started rocking and blasting away with our big Garnet amps, and we played the Dirty Boogie, you know, my old lady and the lady next door, floating down the river on the shithouse door, Dirty Boogie. Last time I saw her, she was floating down the stream, her ass was spouting bubble and her cunt was spouting cream, Dirty Boogie. They all loved it. And then that was a song George Jorgensen, Gowan's dad, taught us. I think the first verse is, no, that's my old lady and the lady next door floating down the river on the shithouse door. And, the last time I saw her, she was floating down the stream. Her ass was spouting bubbles and her cunt was spouting cream. I think there's one more verse. Anyway, and then we played the Marijuana song, which is a song I wrote about marijuana. I love that good old marijuana. And about the friendly stranger and all this. Then we blasted away. Probably did Policeman's Coming. That's another one. Policeman's coming. Gonna hit you on the head. What a shame. Someone ends up dead. Misery, sympathy. Brother, who's your friend? Anyway, we did the Policeman's Coming. Then we packed up, and the guards all came out down and, hey, let's give you a hand. We'll give you a hand. Packed it all in the van. Drove out through the gates. Ron lit up the hash pipe again, and then we smoked, and away we went on the way home. Anyway, when he died, he was the pitcher for the Patterson Avenue Perverts. I wrote this it's called The Ode to the Great Tomato. Oh, here we go. The Ode to the Great Tomato. There once was a great tomato, a legend throughout the land. He liked to drink. He liked to smoke. He liked to party, and don't forget the toke. He was full of life, full of fun, a super guy. He was second to none. He had a softball team, Patterson Avenue Perverts. There is no doubt he would pitch his famous yeah ball and strike the rival team out. The good old Tomato, another rout. He had a love for music and had a lot of great friends, and even managed a rock and roll band. Now he's gone, let's remember him with a smile in our hearts for our old friend. If there is another place, Ron will be there in the race to pitch the perfect game and to take his proper place up on the mound in the by and by, on the diamond in the sky. So let's raise our glass. Ron was the most. 3 cheers to the great Tomato, now that he's toast. He got cremated, by the way. Anyway, he would have got a kick out of that. So anyway, that's my little story. Thank you. I thought I did this one before, but maybe I didn't. I talked to Gowan, our bass player from the Northwest Company, and I was a little confused. I thought we did a concert in Prince George. I know we used to play the Generator nightclub up there. I remember us taking LSD up there too, and some guys went to the river on river rafting, and I don't know, I ended up at some party house with some gal, I don't know who it was. The Generator was a club upstairs, and then there was a strip bar downstairs in there, I think I told these stories before, but I'll tell them again anyway. I also played the Yellowhead Inn up there when my cousins showed up. 2 of my cousins, we ended up upstairs. Me and one of them were romping around on the bed, for God's sakes. I can't remember which one. Anyway, I heard their dad had been killed up there by the railroad tracks. I went to some bar one night asking around about it, some tough bar, and somebody told me to shut my mouth and get out. Anyway, the concert that I was talking about was with Northwest Company, was in Grand Prairie, and we were a trio, I think, there. We played with Brave Belt, and they were, Brave Belt was Randy Bachman's band after the Guess Who. Well, we knew him from the Guess Who anyway, because the Northwest Company and Guess Who were sort of friends, and he had Brave Belt up there. I think Seeds of Time and maybe Willie and the Walkers from Edmonton, Seeds of Time from Vancouver were on that show. Brave Belt later on became BTO. So, and then the other job that we played was with Mash McCann and Crowbar up, and King Biscuit Boy, I think, was on that show up at the Field House in Edmonton. And that was many years ago, but I remember King Biscuit Boy. He was a harp player. He just died recently. And Crowbar was a really good band. So was Mash McCann. That was at the Field House anyway. It was a big concert, like one of the outdoor concerts we always did. So anyway, I guess I'll put that part in now. So, okay. Hi, this is Richard Stepp. This is my story of playing with the Northwest Company band I played with for many years. I was the drummer and songwriter, singer in that band also. This is the story about a gig we played with 10 years after up in Edmonton. I'll tell a lot more about the Northwest Company trips we did, non-stop driving to Edmonton and back and staying in a motel just to shower. But anyway, 10 years after, here's the story that I wrote out about it. It was the summer of 1972 when our band, the Northwest Company, performed at Clark Stadium in Edmonton, Alberta, with 10 years after, the famous band from England. Rita Coolidge, the Flying Burrito Brothers, the Whackers, and the Northwest Company were the acts booked on the show. It ended up Rita Coolidge and the Burrito Brothers didn't show up. I can't remember if the Whackers did, but Gowan, the bass player from the Northwest Company, said there was a band played, but he couldn't remember who it was. He thought it was another Edmonton band, so the Whackers, I'm not sure. But I do remember, I think it might have been Willie and the Walkers. But anyway, the bands that did play were 10 years after. Country Joe, he was a solo. It was from Country Joe and the Fish, but he played solo. The Northwest Company of the Seeds of Time. Oh, it was Willie and the Walkers. That's who it was, yeah. went on to play in Powder Blues later in his career. He was a really good piano player. So the Whackers was a different band, but they didn't play. The only other band was Flash Cadillac and the Continental Kids. They were like played old-time 50s music. It was a beautiful sunny day in the hippie psychedelic era, was still in full swing. The Northwest Company was at the height of their career, and we were a very hot trio. All three of us sang original songs, and we were very accomplished on our instruments. We used 100-watt Garnet amps, and our sound was amplified through a large De-Ong sound system. I was one of the best drummers around at the time. I was great with double bass drums and could do fast rolls on them, and performed wicked solos. If you go onto YouTube, you can hear the Northwest Company live. You can hear my drumming on there. I wasn't afraid of any other drummers, and I was in the league of the great rock drummers. I'm not bragging because it's true. I used to practice like you wouldn't believe, and I was really well respected. Everybody was so disappointed when I quit playing drums and switched to guitar, because I could have went on to be with anybody, I suppose. Ray O'Toole was a fantastic guitar player in our band. He could solo for hours. Also a great songwriter. And Gowan was very aggressive, badass bass player. Used distortion and fuzz on his bass, and he could match anyone. He really held the bottom together, the bottom end of our band together. And Gowan was a great songwriter too, and singer. He was very different. We had a house on Patterson Avenue in Burnaby, BC at the time, and it was the greatest. We had this really neat house with the five of us living in it, and the five of us. We had the manager and four of us, I guess. The manager, Ronnie Graham, Ronnie Tomato, we called him. And down the street was Scotty Bergstrom, who owned Moose Valley Farms, who put that concert on up in Edmonton. He was a promoter. Anyway, we all lived in that house. So Ronnie Tomato Graham was a real character in his own right. Scotty Bergstrom from Moose Valley Farms. He put on rock concerts all over Western Canada. He was responsible for the Edmonton show. We were like a big family with a lot of followers back in those days, including beautiful girls. And I was one of the best dressed rock stars in the world. I had a girlfriend from 4th Avenue that made me gorgeous clothes. They were custom fitted with beautiful embroidery all over. Unfortunately, I threw a lot of them away in later in my life when I was breaking up with my first wife, Lisa. Wish I would have kept them. Her name was Terry McConaughey. She went on to be very famous clothing designer for big rock stars like Elton John, Rod Stewart. She now has a company with a lot of employees designing her clothes for movie industry and has many successful movies to her credit. But she used to live at our house for a little while too, up in one of the closets. But she would sew for hours and custom fit all my clothes. I was dressed so good. Anyway, it was a beautiful sunny day. Everyone was in a great mood, all the beautiful people. One thing I remember is we performed twice that day. We did a short set to start the show. To delay the concert that day, Scotty from Moose Valley Farms wanted some time for Flash Cadillac and the Continental Kids to show up because he had to shuffle the acts because Rita Coolidge canceling. Later in the day, we played our regular time with the other acts before 10 Years After came on and performed. We did a great set that day, really rocking the place. Earlier in the day, we had played a few ballads, which I loved. One was called Sunshine by Gowan Jorgensen, our bass player. Another one by me called It's a Beautiful Day Today. And I'm Your Guy, probably did that one too. On the later set, we performed some of the songs we used to play. An old World War II song Gowan's dad taught us called The Dirty Boogie. We used to jam that thing for 20 minutes at a time. Played it to a boogie shuffle. It went on 20, 25 minutes, who knows. We used to get the girls to take their tops off or anything else. It was in the days of Wreck Beach and all that, taking part in the middle of the song. And we'd sort of get the boogie going. And those were the days. It was the era of free love, nudity, Wreck Beach. the Vancouver nude beach. I used to go to Wreck Beach all the time, and I went down there with 5 girls one time, and they were, 16, 17, 18 years old, who knows. I remember that. It'll never get any better than this. Anyway, I know I was in perfect shape back then, too, because of playing the drums. We were in the thick of it and would shock the prairie crowds because they were not as hippified as the West Coast at the time. In the middle of the song, we got a lot of people in the crowd to start shedding their clothes. And there were a lot of topless, beautiful girls there. I was in such great shape from drumming so much. I had long hair, I guess a mustache, beautiful custom embroidery clothes on. So I took my top off to encourage the crowd as they cheered me on. So then I took off the rest of my clothes, which left me playing the drums naked, which I'm kind of embarrassed about nowadays, but we didn't wear any underwear at the time, custom pants. The crowd went wild, I remember. I can't remember if I played the rest of the set Balls to the Wind or not, but sitting down behind the drums covered the family jewels pretty much. When we finally finished the set, I guess I dressed again, and we came back and played an encore, and we went to the dressing room. We did an encore, probably did the African song or Policeman's Coming. That was a big jam song. I'm a bit embarrassed about it now, but it must have been quite a sight, and I was in my physical prime. There was also a picture of the show in the Edmonton paper the next day with the Northwest Company playing from the back. You could, with me playing the drums. I wish I had a copy of that paper. Probably could see my bare ass. Lindsay Mitchell used to tease me. He was from the Seeds of Time and Prism. He used to tease me for years about shedding my clothes, but I remember the Seeds of Time took a picture with their clothes off too, promo picture. They were buff naked too, and those were the times. We performed one of our best, longest songs too, called Policeman's Coming, which I would play my signature drum solo with ferocious double bass drums, and I could do these rolls, and I could do these other things where you hit the snare, or you hit the tom, one tom, next tom, bass drum. So I could get that thing going like crazy. When we were in the dressing room, there's another memorable part. We had already played our set and our encore, and we were drinking and celebrating. Gowan from the Northwest Company, Jeff Eyre, he was from one of the other bands, and Country Joe were singing some songs. Gowan was playing Country Joe's expensive Yamaha acoustic. We knew Country Joe from a concert we played with at the Memorial Arena in Victoria. 10 years after came in, and we started talking together and having drinks. Then they went over and sat down to tune their guitars over and go over their set list to start getting ready to perform. I remember we kept talking and partying, and their manager came over and told Gowan and Jeff and Joe, Country Joe, to shut up while Alvin Lee and the bass player Leo Lyons tuned their guitars. We couldn't believe they didn't even have a tuning amp. They used a tuning fork or a harmonica and then stuck their ear on the other instrument. I can't, to get the original note, I guess they used a harmonica, I think, or a tuning fork. Then they put their ear on the guitar stock to hear the note, to tune their guitars. I thought it was unusual, but I guess it worked for them. They didn't really have tuning machines back in those days. And when it's noisy, you can't hear the notes, but I just remember him thinking, I thought, gee, that's funny, they wouldn't have a tuning amp or something. But we were partying away, I guess. They played a great show 10 years after. Alvin Lee was a fantastic, playing very fast licks and singing great. The drummer Rick Lee and the bass player Leo Lyons were also superb. The band played great together. It was a real special day. I can't remember what we did after the show. Probably partied. We were. I think we were taking LSD and everything back in those days, of course. Smoking dope. We might have driven all the way back to Vancouver. We used to do that. We did a show in Edmonton with Crowbar and Mash McCann once, where we drove all the way from Vancouver to Edmonton, had showers somewhere, played the show at the Field House, I think it was, and then drove all the way back to Vancouver with no sleep. We got a call in the afternoon in Vancouver to go play this concert, and we got in the van, packed the van, drove all the way up there, and some of us took some LSD on the way, and we were drinking beer in the truck too on the way up, and then we had our shower and played the concert and drove all the way back. We also had two roadies at the time, Jim Pentland and Kenny McCall. Kenny went on to be a famous singer around Vancouver. He's a really neat guy. There was 7 of us in the Ford Econoline van towing a trailer. What an experience. Those were the days. Talking to Gowan about the concert, he informed me that occasion we stayed at a motel, and I took groupies back to the hotel with us after. Apparently I got up early to drive my gal home. Gowan thinks I wasn't so enthralled in the morning after sobering up. When I went out with her to the band van, the tires were flat for some reason. I had to change them before I could drive her home. After hearing this, I guess it was the Crowbar Mash McCann show we did in Edmonton, where we drove from Vancouver, played the show and drove all back in one haul. Whew. That's the end of that story, folks. There's a couple of stories. I forgot about the Northwest Company. We played with Crowbar. I can't remember if that was in Edmonton or the one we did in Grand Prairie. I know we played with Brave Belt. That we did one in Prince George, where we played a concert up there. I think that was Brave Belt. That was Randy Bachman's band. And I think we played might have been Bachman Turner Overdrive or Crowbar. One of those bands. Crowbar was in Edmonton, I think, but we played with another band up in Grand Prairie, and I can't remember if that was Brave Belt also, or if it was Bachman Turner Overdrive when they first started. And we played with Sonny Terry Brownie McGee down at the Gastown Inn. I remember that job because it was a nightclub down in Gastown. There was a hotel called Gastown Inn. Anyway, we played with them for a week down there, and I didn't really realize that they were such good blues players. I should have listened to them closer. I remember Sonny played the harmonicas and Brownie played the guitar, and they were stomping their feet and playing this really good blues music. And it was Gassy Jack's, not the Gastown Inn, sorry. Gassy Jack's was the nightclub we played at. And the Gastown Inn was the smoking dope out of the Mask, I think. But anyway, that was another story. But Sonny Terry, Brown, and McGee were really great. I wish I would have studied them a little bit better because they influenced a lot of people. And Mississippi Fred McDowell came to town once. I got a poster of him, but I never went to see him. But I remember Sonny Terry, Brown, and McGee, we didn't get to really talk to him too much. They always had all these groupies and people hanging around him. I remember seeing them sitting in the dressing room with all these gals. And so that's just a little footnote to my Northwest Company days. Well, here we go, another day. I just wanted to correct a few things about Ray O'Toole, who was the guitarist, songwriter in the Northwest Company. Gowan and I sort of had bad feelings about him after he left the band, and it never quite got repaired, but I must say good things about Ray also. We used to call him Blackie because he was such a devil, but he was a fantastic guitar player and still is, and a great songwriter too, and singer. He could play the fiddle, banjo, mandolin. He played really great guitar. He could solo for 20, 30 minutes without ever repeating a lick. He could play slide guitar. He taught me a lot of guitar, actually, like how to finger pick and, lots of tricks and licks on the guitar. Him and Danny Tripper. Danny Tripper was a really huge influence on my guitar playing. Ray O'Toole taught me a lot of things, and he went on to play with Blue Northern, which he played in Home Cookin, and he played with Shakedown too for a while, I think, and he played with Home Cookin. Blue Northern, which had Billy Cowsill from the Cowsill family, and Billy actually sang backups on one of my songs that I recorded with Bill Crompton, and he did the vocals on the back so great. Him and Billy worked in Blue Northern together, and Billy was kind of a drunk, and he would break all his strings, but he had a super fantastic voice, and Billy Cowsill eventually died in Calgary, probably of liver failure or something, but he sang on my song Hopes and Dreams. And the way they produced it, Lindsay Mitchell from Seeds of Time, Prism, produced it, but I didn't really like the production. It made it sound too Englishy instead of rock. I wanted it to more rock. I've done a few versions myself, but the vocals, Billy Cowsill, it was an honor to have him singing on that. Gee, he did, he smoked camels all the time, but his voice was great. But anyway, Ray O'Toole, I can't say bad things about him in a lot of ways. He's a lot of fun, that guy, and he's a great guitarist. And he married Jeannie, who used to be around Ross's wife at the Northwest Company, and but we always kind of felt like we were brothers before he left the band. It kind of shafted our band because we would have went on to be like Rush, that band out in Canada. You know, we were really doing well, and I was one of the very best drummers, probably rock drummers in the world. And you know, he could solo along with the best guitar players anywhere. Ray, you know, and Gowan could bang away on the bass, man. He was great and a good songwriter. And once Gowan got a note for singing, he was pretty good at it. But, you know, Gowan was a unique bass player. He used to put fuzz tone on his bass and effects and everything. So that's just a little update I just put in, okay? Okay, this is another part of the Northwest Company, up to the demise, I guess. I forgot to notice if I mentioned all the members of the Questions band first. It was my first band was the Esquires, had me, Dennis Servio, and Reed Smith in it. The Questions had myself, Frank Babakayev, Dave Rougeau, Rick Coleman, and Adrie Van Viersen playing bass. Coleman played piano. Dave Rougeau played sax. Frank played guitar. Anyway, when I was in the Northwest Company, in our Patterson Avenue days, I was probably one of the very best rock drummers in the world. I was in super shape. I practiced heavy. I could do double bass drums, like long rolls. You can hear it on my drum solos sometimes. On starting with my left leg, using it as the lead to do the roll, and with my right leg, being ambidextrous, I could also do these other rolls where I'd get the one bass drum bump and the other bass drum bump, a tom and a tom, so till it would end up like that. Anyway, that's something I have to. And then I forgot to mention, when we were a trio, we recorded songs down at the Sycord Studios again at 4th Avenue, where we recorded Time for Everyone as a 5-piece. We did a song, beautiful song that Gowan wrote called Sunshine. I always loved that song. And a song I wrote called I'm Your Guy, which Gowan used to always go, I'm a you guy. And Honky Tonk Blues, which I wrote, and Don't Hear Me Complain, which Ray wrote. And they were really good songs. And Chris Blades, the artist, he's a very famous artist, but he used to do all our artwork for us. And he did the cartoon drawing of the Northwest Company where I'm sitting down playing my tablas and Ray. It's quite a famous drawing. And he also did the single for, when we were a trio, I forgot to mention, we did Rock and Roll Lover Man, which had Let It All on the flip side. And we recorded that up at PBS Studios in West Van, where they had a film set up there for McCabe and Mrs. Miller, the movie. It was sort of a Western movie. It had Warren Beatty and Julie Christie, and we used to meet them in the hallway, talk to them. And they had a Fred Latrimo and Daryl B were producing us up there. It was frustrating. One guy'd come up one night and then they didn't like the track. We'd have to do it the next night. And there's a really good picture of us up there. And we did Rock and Roll Lover Man and Let It All, which are two really great songs. And we had it out as a 45. I think Rock and Roll Lover Man made it to number 10 somewhere. And maybe Winnipeg, or it got quite a lot of airplay. And that's when we were kind of at the height of our career. And we took some pictures up at the old McCabe and Mrs. Miller set up in West Van. I remember that was another drum room that was a horror. It was carpeting, stuffy and horrible in there. I forgot to mention that before. That's too bad. Well, I mentioned it now, so there you go. Anyway, at our Patterson house, Ross and Jeannie also moved in there. Ross was, he was a neat guy that used to hang around the band. His parents owned Cockney Kings, the fish and chip joint that Long John Baldry, the artist from England that did Don't You Lay No Boogie Woogie on the King of Rock and Roll, which was produced by Rod Stewart and Elton John. He used to love eating it. He moved to Vancouver years later, and I actually played a week gig with him in my Richard Stepp Band up in Edmonton, and he was really great. I liked him a lot. What a great song. Great voice. I found out he was gay later on because his boyfriend and me and Robbie King, who was a famous keyboard player around town, and some other people used to smoke dope and snort coke. And I found out he was Long John Baldry's boyfriend. I didn't know at the time, but anyway, Long John Baldry's a great artist. And anyway, Ross and Jeannie moved in, and his sister Lee Evans, she lived down on the corner at that little house at Patterson. And Ross was kind of a gullible guy. He liked playing guitar and singing, and he was lots of fun. And anyway, Ray moved in on Jeannie eventually because he was such a little bugger. He moved in and stole Jeannie away from Ross. They used to have a Volkswagen van that they sort of camped in and everything, Ross and Jeannie. And then Ray stole her away from him. And then eventually, Ray quit the band. Before he quit the band, I remember we played we got booked down at a gay dance somewhere. I can't remember if Ray was in the band still. But it was a dance downtown somewhere at a gay place. It was a Halloween dance. What a thing that was. We went in there, and these guys had all these outfits. One guy had a sailor's outfit with no bum, the bare back in it with his bare bum sticking out. The guys were all dancing around holding onto his bum. And then that reminds me of a story, me and Marcia, when we were married. We went down to meet Brian, a guy from the Super Value. He worked for Ross McClellan, who was a Hell's leader, the banker for the Hells Angels in Vancouver. His mother, McClellan's mother, and my mother grew up in Mara together. Her name was Koskamaki. Anyway, we went down we were waiting for Brian to get off work. This is kind of off the message, but we went down to meet Brian after work, and he wasn't finished, so he said, I'll go get a drink somewhere. So we went down. There's no place to drink on Davie Street because that's where the Super Valley was. So we seen this club called Pump Jacks. You know what that name tells you. Me and Marcia went in and sat down in there. All the guys were looking at me and the girls were looking at Marcia. And I remember in the Northwest Company when we played that gay dance, it was all uncomfortable going into the can to take a pee. There's all these guys standing around and looking at you. Anyway, well, and then Ray finally quit the band because he wanted to live with Jeannie, and he went and joined this little crap band, which I later joined. And then so Ronnie Graham quit at the same time. I think Ron hung in for a little while. We moved out to a place on 11th and 13th Street in New Westminster, a house there. I got fond memories of making love with Lisa in this one little bedroom. I was so young then, and she was so tight and beautiful, and so exciting. Holy crap. We had to go real slow at it or it would be over before you know it. But that one thing stuck in my mind. I even drove by that place a few times and looked at the window that I knew was the bedroom where we'd made love. Anyway, we were going out back then, so then Ray said he was coming back, and we all got hyped up thinking, oh boy, and then he changed his mind again. So me and Gowan never liked Ray ever since much. He sort of backstabbed us. We were like brothers, you know. He was a wimp. He sort of wimped out. When Ray was single, he was great. But he had a new manager for a while named Brian Cassidy, and he was pretty good. We moved to a house down on 7th Avenue eventually. I had a guitar, my first electric guitar, because I really wanted to write songs then, and I'd had some success at it. So my mom had bought me a Les Paul Standard, a red Sunburst one. It was a beautiful guitar. And I came home after a gig one night, and the guitar was gone. And God, what a nightmare that was. And I don't know, about a week later, I get a call on the phone, and this guy says, yeah, are you Frank Stepp? Because that's what I had written on a little card in the guitar case. I said, yeah. He said, oh, a friend of mine bought your guitar for $100 down at the Garage nightclub. And he decided that if you want it back, if you give us the $100, you can have it back. So I thought, well, I went. I think the guitar back then was about $500 or $600 new that my mom had bought me. So I went and talked to my manager, and he said, oh, sometimes people do that, and then they take the money when you meet them and forget the guitar and never give you the guitar. So I phoned the cops, and these cops come. I arranged a meeting with this guy. I said, well, okay. He said, you can come over to this place and this house. And I said, well, what's your name? And he says, call me Tom for now. So, okay. So I phoned these cops, and these two narcs come over with me, and we go over to this house. And we go upstairs, and the cop knocks on the door, and this guy opens, and it's Tom Lavin from this band called Uproar at the time. And I knew Tom, you know, and he ended up being the leader in Powder Blues Band, which was a famous blues band from Vancouver. They still play once in a while. And so the cops, there's my guitar plugged into the amp over in the corner. Cop said, is that your guitar? And I said, yeah. And so they took the guitar and arrested Tom. And I said, well, you know, I sort of know the guy. Why didn't you tell me on the phone who you were? I wouldn't have phoned anybody. The cops, you know. And so they took him down to the station, I guess. But I told the cops I didn't want him charged or anything. And so me and Tom never talked the rest of our life. Still haven't talked to him. And I eventually traded that guitar for the white Les Paul Custom that I give to Jesse. I was always a little bit worried about that white Custom, where it came from, because the guy sold it to me was sort of a bit of a dope dealer. But anyway, nobody ever said anything about it. So, and anyway, after we moved to 7th, the band sort of gets a little bit fuzzy, and I from here on, because Gowan and I decided I wanted to switch. I think can't remember who was in the band at the 7th Avenue house, but I decided I was going to start playing guitar in the Northwest Company, because Ray had gone, and we'd tried out some other people, and so me and Gowan got this Zach on lead guitar, Strawberry. His name was Strawberry. Forget what his real name is. He had red hair, long red hair. What was his name? James something or other. I'll remember it one day. And Gowan and me, I played the guitar, you see, but I was not very good on the guitar, so we took a stab at playing like that for a while, and then me and Gowan found a little house out in Kingsway, off Kingsway. It was right beside a tire factory, and it used to stink so bad there. They would be, you know, redoing tires and stuff. It would smell like crazy. And then Gowan had to talk to me one day, and we decided I'd go back and play drums, because it just wasn't working, that Strawberry. James Chadwick, that was his name. So we even went back and tried out this guy with us once with Strawberry and Zach and Gowan and me, named Don. He played piano. We played the Elks Hall somewhere, I think, on the island once with him, and we played the Ambleside, a concert over there, because I remember that one distinctly. But the piano, I don't know, it didn't seem to fit in that good. He was real good on it, though. And so, anyway, me and Gowan eventually moved in with Les Law, who was Roger Law's brother, younger brother from Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck. And he'd played in Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck after Roger had been killed. Mother Tucker's was a really famous band in town, and then Roger quit the band and Les had joined, and instead of moving to San Francisco, which they should have, because they were like, they were the best sort of hippie band, I think, in Vancouver. You can hear their music on YouTube, Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck. But Rogers, I don't know if he drank pretty heavy, and then he ended up running head on into a transport truck up around 100 Mile House or Williams Lake and killed. So Les took over, went to Toronto with Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck, but when they broke up, he came back out and he had a little house on Patterson Avenue down the road. So Gowan and I moved into that house. And so then we had the band going again. Me and Gowan had still been going in the band, I guess, in the meantime with Strawberry and Zach and stuff. So then we had Zach, Leslie Law, me and Gowan in the Northwest Company for a while, still slugging away at it. And then we got rid of Zach somehow. I don't know what happened there. And then we got Brent Schindel from the old High Flying Bird Band in town, from the Schindel brothers. He's a great guitar player and a good singer and a good songwriter. And High Flying Bird was quite a big band in town. They were another sort of a hippie band. And that was a really good version of the Northwest Company. If you go on YouTube, you can look on the Policeman's Comin'. That was done at the Pender Auditorium when we played a concert with Country Joe and the Fish. Except the Fish weren't there. It was Country Joe and a pickup band. But I remember doing the drum solo that, and I couldn't quite get my bass drums going as good as I wanted. But my friend West, who was David Alexander Brown, then he became Rumpelstiltskin, then he became the entire West Coast, then he became Hayseed, then he became Aloha Dave. Anyway, he sort of engineered it and got them to record us at that Pender Auditorium. So that was a good thing he did that, because he was always a neat guy thinking about it. So then Brent, Les, me, and Gowan played the band Northwest Company for a while. And then Brent left somehow, and we got this little guy named Danny Smith, who was a great little guitar player. And he ended up with Six Cylinder, the band Six Cylinder, which was another famous band in Vancouver. He's retired now, I think, teaching guitar lessons or something. But Six Cylinder was a really good band. And there was another guy, Danny Stetsky, involved in that era, that me and West used to go to his house. He was a dope dealer, and we would get joints from him, but he got busted and he took off lived in Amsterdam for a few years. Then he came back. Now he hosts the Joker kind of a thing over at some Legion somewhere. There was another girl around Vancouver called Anna Banana around the time. She was a sort of a known girl, and I'm trying to think of this skinny girl that West used to know. Oh, God, she always looked so unhealthy. We used to go to her house and get a joint once in a while. She was always in the bedroom or something. She'd come out. She would look like she was death warmed over. And I can't remember her name. And then there was Leslie Stearns, which is another one. And then I also met a guy named Loke, who's in the Dogwood video. What the heck was his real name? Well, anyway, I'll talk about him later. Anyway, there was Danny, Les, me, and Gowan at the end, Danny Smith. And we played the Garage nightclub, which was before that called the Purple Steer, and it was a country club before that. And after it was the Garage, which was like a rock place. It became the Love Affair. I think it was a gay joint or something. But I ran into Terry Cipher there, and he was Terry Cipher was a Hell's Angel by then. He was my friend from Sycamoose. He was a bouncer there. That was the first time I'd seen him in years and years and years. And so I remember playing the Garage. It was kind of nice to see Terry again. He was built like a brick, you know what. And he's a little short guy, but tougher than nails. He was always tough, that guy. And anyway, after that, Gowan, I finally broke up with the band, and if I remember other stuff, I'll bring it in later. But Randy Taylor was involved in our band. He was a DJ too, and he sort of helped manage us for a while. It never really went anywhere. But Gowan went on after that. He tried to get a band. After I quit the band, I decided we flogged it long enough. It wasn't going to go anywhere anymore. And so I quit the band, and me and Lisa got a place over on 33rd and Vic. We had a little house there. And Gowan continued on. He went and tried to get a band together with West. West was great, but he could never do anything. He'd freak out. He'd get going on okay, and then he'd freak out. I even tried having a little band once with West where I played the bass in the band with, I don't know who else was in it, but he would always start freaking out and wreck everything. Not freaking out, but getting crabby or something. I don't know. He was frustrating. But Gowan ended up getting a band called Baker Street, which was quite a good band, and he moved in with Denise Enns. She'd been married to Rick Enns from the United Empire Loyalists, and then she took a photo session of me, which I still have the photos of. She put eye makeup on me. And then Gowan ended up working at Benson's graphics place then, because he was quite good at art. Denise eventually married Bruce Allen from Bruce Allen Talent, who managed Bryan Adams. And me and Lisa moved into 33rd and Vic. And then I went back to work, decided I was quitting the music business and going back. I was going to go to school and become a marine biologist or something like that. And so I got a job. I got hold of my old boss again, Norm Hester, at the Department of Highways, and he hired me back. But when I went back, it had changed so much. It was all computer drafting then. Just wasn't like it was when I'd first been working there, you know. And me and Lisa were living on 33rd and Vic, so I started thinking, oh, gee, I'd like to get in the music business. And Ray O'Toole, that band that he had joined when he quit the Northwest Company was called Home Cookin. And he was still playing. They used to play a little club on Kingsway with Irene Butler singing. And so by that time, they'd got a job working at a place called Black Bart's on Kingsway. And so I quit the Department of Highways, and Lisa freaked. And I started playing drums at Black Bart's with the Home Cookin band. They had Ray O'Toole on guitar from Northwest Company, Stan Bell on steel guitar, Gordy on the bass, and me on the drums. Gordy Panchitson, his name was. And so Home Cookin played as a house band at Black Bart's for quite a while. And that was kind of like a nice job compared to drafting again. I didn't like the Virgil guy that I was riding to work. He used to pick me up and take me to work when I went back to the Department of Highways that time. He was a kind of a creepy guy, and I didn't like working at the Department of Highways anymore. And I thought, oh, gee, I'm going to go to school for a long time and end up, who knows what will happen. I'll be up north studying moss on some rock somewhere. So anyway, it was fun joining a band again that was a house band, because you got a steady wage, and you went 6 nights a week, and I probably started drinking too much then. Everybody drank a lot. And that band, the Home Cookin band, then we got hired at the Town Pump, which was like a really big club in Vancouver. It was one of the most famous clubs around. And so we got hired there. It was a real big tourist place. It was packed every night, that place, bus tours or whatever. And so the basic band, Ray, Stan, Gordy, and me, got hired there. And they had these singers that sang with the band. Michael Vincent, who was a really famous singer in Vancouver, and Rosalind Keane, she was a black girl. So we did like a show there, and I was the drummer in that band. And we were up on a stage with a railing and all the tables. It was a dinner club, you know, and it had a lounge and a dinner club. I always remember Rosalind Keane was like a really great black blues singer. And Michael Vincent had a super voice too. He was already been around Vancouver for years. Rosalind Keane used to sit on my knee sometimes on our breaks. God, what a dish she was. Holy God. She used to go out with... She ended up going out with George Chapless, who ended up in one of my bands. But and then I think Rosalind Keane left, and Michael Vincent, we ended up with Irene Butler singing with us. And she was married to Les Vogt, who was he's a promoter. Les Vogt was a star at one time in his own name. He had a record out called The Blamers. The Blamers, the wise man, do 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 do. It's a good song, The Blamers. So Irene Butler was in the band for a while, and then I forget what happened to the band. We went and I think what happened is we switched. Some of the members quit. And then we got, I decided I was going to switch to guitar, I guess. Then we got George Chapless on the bass. He was a really well-known bass player around town. He was Rosalind Keane's boyfriend. And Glenn Hendrickson, that had been in many bands around town. He was in, I can't even name all the bands, but he played double bass drums like me, and he had Black Rogers like me, but I never liked his drumming. Ray always liked it. I don't know, he was too wimpy and too busy, and I was probably crappy on the guitar, so we ended up getting fired. And we don't get fired, let go or whatever. I don't know what happened. But anyway, the band broke up, and the band ended up switching. When I switched to guitar, we ended up going out to the OK Corral in Sapperton. Stan Bell was the kind of the leader of the band, and we went out to the OK Corral in Sapperton. I guess Ray stayed with the band No, I was playing guitar in the band then. Ray had gone. So we went to the OK Corral. It was 6 nights a week. It was like a cowboy club that was packed every night. All these people drinking and partying. And I played the guitar in that band, and Stan played the steel. I wasn't much of a lead player, but I tried my best, I guess. And we played there for quite a long time. Stan Bell ended up the steel guitar player. Years later, he ended up playing with Ian Tyson. So did Ray O'Toole, played with Ian Tyson from Alberta that did Four Strong Winds. He wrote that song, Ian and Sylvia. They went out there and played with Ian Tyson for a long time. And then Stan Bell, I don't know, he was always drinking pretty heavy. He was part Native Indian. He was a real nice guy and a good steel player. Actually, I've got a song somewhere. I should try to find it again and put it on a CD. I didn't put it on my CDs. He sang one of these songs he wrote. I should have saved that. But anyway, he got depressed somehow. And when he was coming back from Alberta from playing with Ian Tyson, he ended up shooting himself in the head out around Chilliwack, killed himself. That's too bad, because he was very good. Anyway, eventually that band, before Stan ever went out to play with Ian Tyson, the band broke up, and I ended up getting in a band with this guy named, it was called High Times. Doug Havens, he was a native Indian guy from Prince Rupert, and Terry was his drummer, and me, and Jim Fraser was the bass player that I knew from somewhere or other, and I played guitar. And so we were like a little four-piece, and we played the OK Corral as the house band there for quite a while. And it was a good, easy little gig. You get up, play 4 sets a night, I guess, and they had booths all fixed up, and Forget the guy, the manager. He was a little short guy. He was a nice guy, though. If I think of it later, I'll put it in. Anyway, I'm going to stop now because the next section I got to think about. Okay, a little update. I remembered the manager's name at the OK Corral where I played with the band High Times. His name was Eddie. Lisa and I can't remember. I know we lived at the house on 33rd and Vic. Lisa, my first wife, her name was Lisa Dowding. And her dad was the Speaker of the House in the NDP government. I was sort of an NDPer back then, left wing, but I'm totally right wing now. After seeing what Fraser Health does to people, that's a completely bumbling government-run organization. Anyway, another thing. We lived there. We lived at Marine Drive also with Lisa's parents when I first started going out with her. She had a little Volkswagen car. It was kind of a neat little car. I didn't even have a car then. I can't remember where I was living at the time. But we were dating quite a bit, and we loved each other a lot. And we used to actually, Lisa and I used to go up Grouse Mountain. We'd hike all the way up the mountain. I remember laying up there naked with her up. Her dad had a little cabin up there. There was only 5 or 6 cabins ever built up Grouse Mountain, and he had that cabin. We just loved it up there. You could see the whole view of Vancouver. It was so nice at night. All the stars, and the air was fresh. There was lots of birds. We used to make love lay out naked on the porch there, and we had a lot of we had good love making. Lisa and I, we were great together. Anyway, we lived at Marine Drive with the parents, and I remember one time I had a jam there with Willie McCalder from Willie and the Walkers came over, Gowan and me playing guitar, and Danny Tripper, who is my very favorite guitar player ever out of Vancouver, and maybe even in the world. He played in Fireweed, and he was actually started as a drummer, but he did a lot of everything, drugs, acid, drinking, everything, but he's my favorite guitar player, that guy. I love his style. He ended up in a band hosting the American Jam for years. Him and Doucette had a Jerry Doucette, who Mama Let Him Play, big hit. He recorded at Mushroom Records. They used to run a jam. Danny always liked my guitar playing. Most people didn't accept me as a guitar player. They wanted me to play drums all the time. And I refused to play the drums. I wanted to be a guitar player. And Tripper always let me play guitar. He always get me up and say, "Here, take my guitar," and he'd give me a Stratocaster, which I couldn't play. And at the American Hotel, and I'd get up there and play. But he always liked my style, that guy. I liked him too. And I guess in those days, I don't know, can't remember exactly where I was living, if it was, we were living at Dogwood. I think I was playing in Home Cookin still. And I went and I got Ray O'Toole, and we went to, for some reason, I guess I talked Daryl B. into giving me a chance to record because I was on my own then. I was sort of branching off on my own. I don't know I think Home Cookin had split up. Maybe I'd been with High Times. I can't remember the sequence. But anyway, Daryl B. liked my songs and my songwriting. He was always good to me. So we went into Mushroom Records, where Hart recorded all their big hits, and Chilliwack recorded there. Jerry Doucette recorded there. Jason Hoover recorded there. They were the biggest recording place, and Daryl B. took me in there. Rolf Henneman was the engineer. Daryl B. produced it, and I recorded a song called Chasing a Dream, and I can't remember the flip on it now. I'll look it up later. Chasing a Dream I always thought should have been a big hit, but it got me on the road because Ray O'Toole played a great guitar spot on that, and I can't remember who we used for bass. Jerry Adolph from Chilliwack played the drums. I didn't play drums on it for some reason. We're always afraid in studios to play. even though I was a great drummer. I don't know why, but anyway, I wanted to be a guitar player. So Chasing a Dream came out on the radio, and it got quite a bit of airplay all over the place, but not enough to throw me over the top. And in the meantime, I guess I was playing in a band part-time. A band had myself, Jim Fraser, Rick Clark on drums. Jim Fraser played the bass. He was from the High Times band. And Neil Harnett, or called himself Neil James sometimes, he was a really good singer and great guitar player, but kind of never quite liked his personality too much. He was pushy and jealous of me being the leader of the band. I shouldn't be saying that in case he ever listens to this, but who cares? Anyway, Neil's a star in his own right, and he deserved to have his own band. That's why he wasn't happy, and eventually he recorded an album himself and got nominated for the Junos like I did. So that's everything worked out in the fine. But at the time, there was always tension between him and me. But it was a really good band, Shakedown. We played all over town, and we went in the studio also and recorded a song called Days Go By, and one of Neil's songs called Showtime, and then Bringing It Back from Mexico, and another, As Days Go By was a really good song, and then Good to Have You, which was a song that I wrote too. And I think we did, I got this whole session of songs where I wrote Mystery Woman and all these, but I don't think we recorded them at Mushroom Records. But Days Go By we did, Good to Have You. And when Home Cookin, actually, Stan Bell, the steel player, recorded a song there too. But Good to Have You, I wanted to have Days Go By go out as a single, but after Chasing a Dream. But Daryl B. was still involved with me, and then Good to Have You was a real commercial sounding song, and he was sort of tied up with Ray Pettinger, who owned Casino Records. And Ray Pettinger, Daryl B., and Gary Taylor, who owned Gary Taylor's Lounge, downtown, full of dancing girls. God, there were some beauties in there. They were involved with some pilot that was smuggling cocaine into Vancouver. He ended up get busted and took the rap for those guys. But that's where they were getting their money. But they were, every time I went to Gary Taylor's, they'd always leave me waiting. They're all in probably partying and doing coke with the girls. And Daryl B., he used to drink a lot. I forgot to tell you, back in the Northwest Company days, when we were still the five-piece putting out records, we used to go down to Seafun and go on air live with Daryl, and all these girls would phone up and want to talk to the band, and he used to let us go on air with him. So anyway, I could never get a hold of Ray Pettinger. They had Foreman Young Band, and he'd signed them to Casino Records, and he had Bim. Bim was his big act, Ray Forbes, who I always liked. Ray Forbes, I liked his music. He became quite big. And Ray Pettinger was another fucking pissed me off guy. He'd always put me on hold, phone me tomorrow, I'm really busy now, one of those guys. Yeah, I'm really on the run right now. Asshole. Anyway, Andy DiMartino got involved with him. Andy was from Los Angeles, and he was a great producer, and he got involved with these guys. And as did Bill Crompton, who was from England. He was from, him and John Schroeder had Harbor Records over in England. And Andy heard my song, Good to Have You, and I was with Shakedown then with me and Jim and Rick and Neil Harnett. So he took us up to Edmonton, and we recorded Good to Have You up there. And we also recorded Days Go By up there and put it out as a 45. And it started getting pretty good airplay. That's how I met Andy DiMartino. Andy had a history he produced that song Rhythm of the Rain for the Cascades, which was a huge hit back in the early 60s. Hear the rhythm of the falling rain, telling me what a fool I've been. And he also produced Captain Beefheart and all kinds of other people. And I'll go into that more when I talk about Holiday in Hollywood. Anyway, we also went up to Fort McMurray. I think it was the same band with Neil. There was a lot of tension in that band. He wanted to have songs on my next album, on my album, and or maybe that was Mike Hanford, one of those two guys. Mike Hanford, I never got along with him either. He was from a band, I think, called 49th Peril out of Winnipeg. But anyway, that's how that got started, and that's how I ran into Andy DiMartino, who heard my song, Good to Have You, and he finally was having the runaround with Pettinger. Ray Pettinger was spending all kinds of money, and Andy was telling me that, he was going down hiring limos in Los Angeles. He was getting money from here and there and front money, and those guys are a bunch of crooks. They'd get your power of attorney and go and make deals, and you never know what happened. Andy knew how to do that too. But anyway, Andy said to me, I'd signed with Casino Records, and he said, you know what, Ray's, you're going nowhere with that company. I think you got a lot of talent, and I think you better come with me to Los Angeles, because what happened is Ray was still involved in the thing, and Andy took me to Los Angeles, and I recorded 3 songs down there. And then Andy and Ray Pettinger, they were all fighting between each other about who was getting to record next. And like Al Foreman and then never got to go down, I don't think, to LA and record. Bim might have, I don't know, but Andy took a liking to my music, and so he finally got so pissed off at Ray Pettinger for blowing money in the wrong way and not knowing what to do and putting me on hold all the time. Andy said, Richard, I'm going to take you down to LA and I'm going to hire all the guys and I'm going to fix it up for you, and we're going to record an album for you, and you forget about Pettinger. You sign with me, Dynamite Records, and I'll fight with Pettinger on the side. So that's the end of that chapter right now, and I'm going to start on the whole new thing with Andy, okay? Okay, I already told you about Brownie McGee, Sonny Terry Brownie McGee, that we played with him at the Gastown, or the Gassy Jacks down in Gastown. And they were great. They had, blowing on the harp, Sonny, and Brownie playing the guitar. And I had a bunch of groupies. I loved their music, though. They played that old-fashioned Delta blues, which is my favorite. And anyway, this chapter is actually about Chuck Berry, who is one of my biggest heroes as far as music goes. I remember first hearing him when I was a kid in Sycamoose, and he was doing stuff, like Ride Along in My Automobile, or, Chuck Berry doing Johnny Be Good, and, Nadine, Maybelline, why can't you be true? And he wrote, so many great songs. Roll Over Beethoven. And I always thought he was a white guy when I was a kid. First time I ever saw a picture of him, I went, holy crap, he's black. And he actually told people that he did that on purpose. He wrote songs that he thought the white kids, teenagers and stuff, would like. But he was a master at lyrics. I still do a lot of his songs, like C'est la vie. It was a teenage wedding and the old folks wished them well. The coolerator was filled with TV dinners and ginger ale. One of my favorite ones is the one that he does, I'll be gone like a cool, cool breeze. That's a great song. Anyway, I got a chance to play a gig with him. He used to come to town. I heard came to Vancouver a few times, and he would come to town, and Danny Tripper knew him. Danny Tripper was a good friend of mine, sort of, and my favorite guitar player. I heard him and Danny used to party around together, and Danny would find him girls for Chuck Berry, and so he could screw. Danny probably loved Chuck Berry, of course, but anyway, we got booked at a gig at War Memorial Gym at UBC with Chuck Berry. I don't know who booked us. I was in Shakedown, my band, and it was me, Marshall Hunt, Rick Clark on drums, Marshall Hunt on bass, me and Neil Harnett on guitar, and then I brought Lisa for singing backgrounds, and her brother Mark, I think, came to that gig and played saxophone. And so we went up first and played our set, which of course nobody really wanted to hear. And then Chuck Berry, the band that was backing him up, he just used to pick up bands in every town because every band knew his songs, you see. They're all 3-chord songs. And he would come to town and then just show up. And that song I was thinking of was called You Can't Catch Me. That's a great song. Anyway, the band, we finished our set and we got off stage, and there was a dressing room downstairs. And the band gets up onto the stage, and they didn't know what to do, you see. We're waiting for Chuck Berry. So they get up and they start playing something. I don't know what they were playing. And everybody's out in the audience getting all hipped up, and I'm waiting. And so I don't know where the rest of my band was, but I walking down the stairs. Chuck Berry used to come in a limo from his hotel. He used to just fly on an airplane and by himself with his guitar. He never took a band. And he had a little suitcase with his clothes in it, I guess. And he'd show up at the airport, jump in the limo, go to the gig. Maybe they paid for a hotel for him, I don't know. But anyway, he showed up in his limo, I guess. I was going down the stairs, and I saw him coming up the stairs. And so I reached out and touched him on the shoulder, patted him on the shoulder, and said, "Have a good gig, Chuck," you know. And I heard he punched Keith Richard right in the face for touching him like that. But he was nice to me. He just said, "Oh, yeah, thanks a lot," you know. And up the stairs he went. And then he got up on stage, and the band's all excited, of course. There was 3 guys behind him, I think, 3 or 4. And so he plugs his guitar in, and he tunes up to the band while the band is playing. He's bing, 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 bing a little bit until he's in tune. And then he starts off playing and does all his antics and a whole bunch of great songs. And he kind of messed around a lot when he played. He was kind of like a joker, you know. Keith Richards used to get mad at him because he didn't play anything serious enough, you know. His recordings were serious, but I seen him a lot of times live at, films of him, and he always joked around a lot, and he didn't play anything serious, you know. But anyway, he got up there and he played his set, and he ended with Johnny Be Good, and you see, and then he walks off the stage, and the whole audience goes wild, and they're clapping, yelling for Chuck, we want Chuck Berry, Chuck Berry. They're laughing, crying, and meanwhile, I see him, I'm standing there, he walks right by, see you later, and he's down the stairs, out the back, in the limo with his money, and off he goes. And I left the band up on the stage playing. And so they play for a while, and the crowd's going, yeah, we want Chuck Berry, Chuck Berry. And then finally the band are looking at each other, what do we do now? And so finally they just quit. And they walked off the stage, and of course the crowd kind of went a little bit mad, I think, you know, hey, what happened here? You know, you always get an encore. But I can't remember him, you know, before he walked out, after he got off stage the first time and took his guitar with him, he never went for an encore. He'd left the building, you know. So that's my Chuck Berry story. I forgot to mention about Mushroom Records. It was a 16-track studio, as far as I remember. Analog, I think. But I had a Mushroom Records ring that had Amanita mushroom on it. It was a silver ring. And I had it for years and years and years, and damned if I can find it. I went through all my stuff in the last, around 2016, 17, reboxed everything. I found everything nearly, except I can't find that ring. Shelley Siegel was the name of the guy that owned Mushroom Records. That was a famous studio. And also Ray Pettinger, that owned Casino Records. He had jackets made up with, I don't know if mine had a name on it or not, but I was supposed to get one of these jackets of Casino Records, and I heard when they started all fighting, Bill Crompton got involved then. He was from Harbor Records over in England. I'll do a chapter on Crompton separate, because he was a famous songwriter that wrote House of Bamboo for Andy Williams. It was a big hit in the States, #3. And he wrote that song about the Mexican volcano, Petapatic, or whatever the name of it is. That was another song he wrote. He wrote some, and he was also involved with those guys that had Black is Black, because he recorded me. I sang a version of that once, but he was involved with Ray Pettinger too, and I heard he ended up with the Jackets somehow, and then I don't know whatever happened to him, because I'm going to do a whole chapter on Bill Crompton, because I was involved with him for a while too, so that's just a tag end on the other one.